Today, we're going to tell the story of a woman who found herself in a challenging situation. Her friends, who had journeyed from distant places to enjoy their vacation, discovered that leaving was more complicated than arriving. Welcome, dear viewers. May peace be upon you all. We're going to delve into the popular 2015 film Landmine Goes Click. Let's get started, and don't forget to show your support by liking this video. The movie begins in Georgia with a truck making its way up a hill. Inside are three friends, Chris, Daniel, and Alicia, embarking on a hiking adventure. Daniel is the first to step out and take in their campsite. Meanwhile, Chris and Alicia share a hushed conversation about their secret relationship. Alicia, who is due to marry Daniel in just a few days, is filled with regret. Their clandestine affair, a betrayal of their friend Daniel, looms large between them. After Daniel signals them to begin their hike, Chris and Alicia follow behind him. They chat about the peak they're climbing, a former battlefield. As they carefully navigate the terrain, they discuss the landmines left buried by soldiers during the war. That night, under a starlit sky, they light a bonfire at their campsite. As darkness falls, Chris pronounces Daniel and Alicia as husband and wife. The couple, joyful and slightly inebriated, retreat to their rental. Daniel begins to undress as he moves towards Alicia, planting a tender kiss on her forehead. Alicia, conscious of their surroundings, urges Daniel to shut the tent flap, fearing Chris could see them. Unknown to them, Chris is already watching, growing more distressed by the minute. Despite Chris's unease, Daniel and Alicia continue their intimate encounter while Chris puts out the fire. As dawn approaches, Chris wakes up from a deep sleep in his tent. He spots a man lurking near Daniel and Alicia's belongings. Rising slowly, he confronts the man, leading to a scuffle. The unfamiliar man turns out to be Debbie, Daniel's friend, and a trekking first responder, only revealed when Alicia and Daniel rush to the scene. Chris apologizes for his misunderstanding, and the tension starts to ease. Debbie retrieves Alicia's camera, suggesting they take a photo together. They all agree and get ready for the shot. Debbie guides them to make minor adjustments, directing them towards a stunning view on the left. However, calamity strikes when Chris steps on a landmine. Debbie freezes and instructs Chris to stay put. Daniel and Alicia are terrified, unsure of their next move. Debbie promises to get help from the nearby town, warning them that it will take around 4 hours. As Debbie is about to leave, Daniel yells at him. Alicia and Daniel retreat behind a large rock, their fear palpable. They strategize on how to keep Chris safe and not abandon him. Hoping for a signal, Daniel's phone suddenly rings. He starts discussing the need for a helicopter and landmine specialists with the operator on the other end. Before ending the call, he assures Alicia that they don't rescue thieves. Alicia is taken aback by Daniel's words. His anger surges, leading him to confront both Chris and Alicia. Alicia had no idea that Chris had divulged everything to Daniel. They both apologize, but it's too late. Daniel had masterminded the entire situation. The call was a sham. There was no signal, and his anger towards them prevents him from accepting their apologies. He starts packing his belongings, planning to abandon them. He ventures far from where Debbie had gone, suggesting they grab some beer and watch dancers. Meanwhile, they are formulating a plan when a local man comes up to them. They ask him to help them dig the ground. Ilya, the man and his dog. Ilya rushes towards them in a state of panic. They explain their predicament, and, in a desperate bid to gain his assistance, Ilya asks Alicia why she is with Chris, who isn't her husband. Ilya agrees to help, but insists on being paid. They warn him that they can only give what they have in return. Attempting to share a private moment with Alicia, he starts going through their belongings after getting Ilya's approval. He finds Alicia's underwear and gives it to his dog to sniff, claiming it's necessary for helping them. Chris, though infuriated, has no other option as their lives are at stake. He tells Ilya that he has $380 in a credit card with him. Ilya agrees to help, but instead of American money, he expresses an interest in Alicia's pants. Alicia agrees and starts to walk towards her tent, but Ilya stops her, insisting she undress in front of him. After some hesitation, she complies and hands over her underwear to Ilya, who receives it politely, sniffing it as though it's a brand-new item. With what he wanted now in hand, Ilya begins to assist them by starting to dig. He asks Alicia for specific instructions, and she instructs him to dig a hole 2 feet away and deep enough for Chris to jump into. Suddenly, a radio in Ilya's bag rings. Chris and Alicia urge him to call for help immediately, their hopes slightly rising. However, Ilya, who is currently helping the stranded Americans, tells his friend Sergei that the soup is ready as he reaches for his bag. Amidst the chaos, Alicia is desperate to use the radio, but Chris's frustration boils over, causing him to lash out at Ilya. This offends Ilya, and he threatens to withdraw his help if they continue to disrespect him. Alicia pleads with Ilya for the radio, but he insists on a trade in return. Visibly upset and frustrated, Alicia states that Chris is in trouble, and there's no time for games. Just as he's about to lend his radio, he tosses Alicia's underwear and asks her to fetch it. Alicia is livid, but left with no choice. Ilya demands that she behaves like a dog and crawl on the ground. It's deeply humiliating, but she decides to comply. Gently, she gets on her knees, lies down, and starts moving like a dog. As she prepares to retrieve the underwear, she begins to crawl towards Ilya. He tosses it again, this time insisting that she carries it in her mouth. Alicia retrieves the underwear, biting into it and bringing it back to Ilya. With Ilya's permission to use his radio, Alicia attempts to communicate, but the individual on the other end doesn't comprehend English. Ilya offers his translation services, but in typical fashion, he wants something in return. Despite their annoyance and frustration, Chris and Alicia decide to follow Ilya's lead, given his understanding of the language and knowledge of their location. Ilya then suggests a game. For each word he translates, Alicia must remove a piece of clothing. Alicia is repulsed by the idea and firmly declines. She orders him to leave, asserting they no longer require his assistance. She grabs a shovel and starts digging on her own. However, Ilya approaches her once more, revealing that the person on the other end of the line, Sergei, is concerned about Ilya. He compels Ilya to pick up the phone and assure Sergei that he's fine. As Alicia continues digging, Ilya struggles to convey her concern as Sergei can't understand English. To indicate that she's okay, Ilya disrobes. Now taking control, Ilya converses with Sergei in Georgian over the radio. Unexpectedly, Ilya undresses. The game is abruptly stopped when Chris commands Ilya to halt. Ilya, now angered, collects her belongings and leaves, mentioning that Sergei is still talking about the soup. Ilya's patience dwindles and she becomes furious. She reaches for her shotgun and points it at him. As Chris desperately tries to pacify her, Ilya starts to flee, commanding her dog to follow. In a rage, he swears that Chris will pay for his actions. Chris abandons the shotgun, chasing after Ilya and her dog. In a state of desperation, he formulates a plan to retrieve the weapon. He manages to secure the shotgun and brandishes it towards Ilya, who now holds Alicia hostage, armed with a knife. A heated argument filled with curses ensues between Chris and Ilya. As Ilya's anger escalates to madness, she begins to harm Alicia. Chris, potentially having shot Alicia, finds himself unable to pull the trigger. Ilya tactically distances herself from Chris, disappearing behind a boulder. She forces Alicia to join her, positioning herself in front of Alicia, who lies face down on the rock. Methodically, Ilya removes Alicia's bra and pants, leaving her vulnerable. As Ilya begins her assault, Alicia lets out a cry of pain and disgust. From a distance, Chris watches the woman he loves being attacked by a crazed local man. Although armed, he is unable to use his weapon. As Ilya starts to tire, Alicia's wild reaction only fuels his anger. A blow to the head with a rock leaves Ilya disoriented. Chris, ready to shoot, calls out to Alicia, but a sudden dog attack causes him to faint, hitting the ground semi-conscious. Ilya reveals the landmine to be a fake, and the whole situation a setup. There's no threat of death. Chris finds himself lying next to a gravely injured Alicia, her body covered in blood from multiple gashes on her neck. As Ilya makes his way to leave, Chris's desperate cries for help go unheard, with Alicia slowly fading away in his arms. The narrative then introduces us to a family residing in the Georgia suburbs. This family comprises a young girl, Laika, and her mother, seen engaging in household chores and sharing a conversation. Their peaceful routine is interrupted by a knock on the door from an American tourist who appears lost and disoriented. With his car's GPS having failed him, he struggles to comprehend the directions given by Tanya, the mother, prompting him to inquire about a potential map he could buy. Tanya informs him they don't have one, but the ever-helpful Laika offers to print one from their computer, inviting the stranger, who introduces himself as Chris, into their home. With a map in hand and hunger gnawing at him, Chris asks about local eateries. Tanya, informing him of the lack thereof, invites him to join them for dinner. Chris graciously accepts, engaging in conversation like a typical intrigued tourist. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of their property, Ilya is busy tending to a bee farm. His dog's incessant barking towards the house piques his curiosity, leading him to abandon his work and investigate. Upon arrival, he spots an unfamiliar boot at the doorstep, and to his horror, he finds Chris, the stranger, dining with his family. This sight triggers a wave of fear and anxiety in Ilya, who, in a fit of anger, retrieves his shotgun from the foyer. Chris, however, confronts him, asserting his knowledge of the unloaded state of the rifle. Despite the chaos, Ilya is shot in the legs by Chris. In the aftermath, Tanya and Laika emerge to understand what has transpired. They timidly approach Chris, their fear evident, asking how they can assist. Chris directs Laika to move her father to a room and bind her mother. He insists that Ilya confess everything, including his actions towards Alicia and his manipulative games, despite Ilya and Tanya's tearful pleas. Ilya admits his wrongdoings, blaming his actions on his drunken state. To emphasize his point, Chris retrieves a bottle of vodka from their kitchen. Angered, Chris begins to pull the trigger. After dismissing Ilya's excuses and apologies, the tension rises, and a bullet is accidentally discharged from his firearm, hitting Laika in the head and ending her life abruptly. As Chris gazes at the lifeless Laika, he is overwhelmed by shock and fear. The film depicts Chris grappling with his terror, guilt, and remorse for his actions. In a heartbreaking twist, he inadvertently takes the life of a young girl in an attempt to save his own. This marks the end of the film. We cordially invite our viewers to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. Thank you.